Question 1. Consider a scenario where a global manufacturing firm experiences a sudden and widespread port closure due to an unexpected geopolitical event, severely disrupting its inbound raw material flow and outbound finished goods distribution. An internal auditor, tasked with evaluating the firm's adherence to ISO 22318, 2015 for supply chain continuity, needs to assess the crisis communication effectiveness. Which of the following communication strategies would best demonstrate compliance with the standard's intent for managing such a disruption? Option A. Issuing a single, broad public statement through the company's main website, assuming all stakeholders will access it for information, and waiting for direct inquiries to address specific concerns. Option B. Prioritizing communication only with critical Tier 1 suppliers, deferring communication with downstream customers until the disruption is resolved to avoid causing unnecessary alarm. Option C. Utilizing a multi-channel communication approach that includes direct alerts to affected suppliers and customers, regular updates via a dedicated crisis portal, and designated points of contact for inquiries, while also establishing a mechanism for gathering feedback on the impact and response. Option D. Relying solely on automated system notifications that indicate delays without providing context or proactive guidance, and only responding to direct requests for clarification from key partners. Correct answer is C. Utilizing a multi-channel communication approach that includes direct alerts to affected suppliers and customers, regular updates via a dedicated crisis portal, and designated points of contact for inquiries, while also establishing a mechanism for gathering feedback on the impact and response. Explanation. ISO 22318, 2015, specifically in the context of supply chain continuity, emphasizes the critical role of effective communication during disruptive events. When a significant disruption occurs, such as a major cyber attack on a key logistics provider impacting delivery schedules across multiple regions, an internal auditor assessing the organization's preparedness must evaluate the communication strategy. The standard requires that communication plans are established and tested. This includes identifying key stakeholders, defining communication channels, and specifying the content and frequency of updates. During a crisis, the communication should be timely, accurate, and consistent across all channels to maintain trust and manage expectations. The auditor's role is to verify that these established communication protocols are followed and are adequate to address the specific nature of the disruption. A critical element is the feedback loop, ensuring that information flows both outwards to stakeholders and inwards from stakeholders to inform the response. Therefore, the most effective communication strategy during such a crisis, from an ISO 22318, 2015 perspective, would involve a multi-channel approach that prioritizes clear, factual updates and actively solicits feedback to adapt the response. This aligns with the standard's focus on maintaining operational resilience through robust information management and stakeholder engagement. Question 2. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's supply chain continuity program, an auditor is examining the risk assessment phase. The organization sources critical components from multiple countries, with some suppliers relying on single-source inputs from even further down the supply chain. Recent geopolitical tensions have escalated in a region where a key supplier operates. The auditor needs to assess the effectiveness of the risk assessment methodology in identifying and evaluating potential disruptions. Which of the following best represents a comprehensive approach to evaluating the risk assessment's adequacy according to ISO 22318, 2015 principles for this scenario? Option A. Checking that the risk assessment included a review of the supplier's business continuity plans, but did not require the auditor to assess the likelihood or impact of specific geopolitical events on the supply chain's overall resilience. Option B. Reviewing the incident response plans for each critical supplier to ensure they have documented procedures for handling localized disruptions, without necessarily linking these to broader supply chain impacts. Option C. Confirming that the risk assessment primarily focused on the financial stability of direct Tier 1 suppliers and assessed their capacity to meet contractual obligations under normal operating conditions. Option D. Verifying that the risk assessment explicitly mapped interdependencies between suppliers across multiple tiers and considered the potential for cascading failures triggered by external events like geopolitical instability. alongside an evaluation of the documented mitigation strategies for high-impact risks. The correct answer is D, verifying that the risk assessment explicitly mapped interdependencies between suppliers across multiple tiers and considered the potential for cascading failures triggered by external events like geopolitical instability, alongside an evaluation of the documented mitigation strategies for high-impact risks. Explanation: ISO 22318, 2015, specifically in the context of supply chain continuity, mandates a thorough risk assessment process. This process involves identifying potential disruptions, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and evaluating the existing controls. When an internal auditor reviews a supply chain continuity program, they must verify that the risk assessment methodology is robust and aligns with the organization's objectives and the specific characteristics of its supply chain. A key aspect of this verification is ensuring that the assessment considers not only direct supplier failures, but also the cascading effects that can occur across interconnected tiers of the supply chain. This includes evaluating the impact of geopolitical events, regulatory changes, such as trade embargoes or new environmental compliance laws, technological failures at a critical node, or even severe weather events that might affect transportation infrastructure. The auditor's role is to confirm that the identified risks are prioritized based on a clear understanding of their potential to disrupt the organization's ability to deliver its products or services, and that mitigation strategies are developed and tested for the most significant threats. The effectiveness of the risk assessment is judged by its comprehensiveness in covering all relevant threat categories, and its ability to inform the development of appropriate business continuity plans. Question 3. An internal auditor reviewing a company's supply chain continuity management system based on ISO 22318, 2015, observes that while the organization has comprehensive plans for various disruption scenarios affecting its key suppliers, there is a lack of formal training for employees on how to interpret and act upon alerts from a new supplier risk monitoring platform. This platform is designed to provide real-time notifications of potential disruptions. The auditor also notes that communication protocols for escalating these alerts to the appropriate decision-makers during a crisis are not clearly documented or practiced. Considering the principles of competence, awareness, and communication as outlined in the standard, what is the most critical deficiency the auditor should highlight? Option A. The detailed nature of the disruption scenarios, which may be overly complex and difficult for operational staff to understand during an actual event. Option B. The absence of a formal agreement with key suppliers regarding their own business continuity plans, which is a separate but related concern. Option C. Insufficient documented communication protocols for escalating supplier risk alerts and a lack of formal training on the new monitoring platform, impacting employee competence and awareness. Option D. The organization's reliance on a new supplier risk monitoring platform without adequate testing of its alert functionalities. Correct answer is C. Insufficient documented communication protocols for escalating supplier risk alerts and a lack of formal training on the new monitoring platform, impacting employee competence and awareness. Explanation: the effectiveness of a supply chain continuity program hinges on the competence of its personnel, their awareness of potential disruptions and the organization's response, and the clarity of communication channels. ISO 22318, 2015 emphasizes these aspects to ensure that an organization can maintain its operations during and after disruptive events. Competence refers to the necessary skills, knowledge, and experience to perform tasks related to supply chain continuity. Awareness involves understanding the significance of continuity objectives and how an individual's contribution supports them, including being informed about relevant legal and regulatory requirements that impact supply chain resilience, such as data protection laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable to the supply chain data, or industry-specific regulations that mandate continuity planning. Communication ensures that information regarding continuity plans, risks, and responses is effectively disseminated to relevant stakeholders, both internally and externally. An internal auditor must assess whether these elements are adequately addressed. Specifically, when evaluating communication, the auditor should verify that there are established procedures for communicating critical information during a disruption, including the identification of responsible parties and the methods of communication. This includes ensuring that all personnel involved in the supply chain continuity process are aware of their roles and responsibilities, and that external stakeholders, such as key suppliers and customers, are informed as necessary and appropriate. In accordance with the organization's communication plan and any contractual obligations, the auditor would look for evidence of training, documented communication protocols, and feedback mechanisms to gauge the effectiveness of these processes. Question 4. During an internal audit of a multinational manufacturing firm's supply chain continuity program, it was observed that, while a dedicated continuity manager was appointed, their authority to unilaterally reallocate critical logistics resources during an unforeseen port closure was not explicitly defined in the formal organizational structure. This situation raises questions about the effectiveness of the established roles and responsibilities for crisis management. Which of the following most accurately reflects the internal auditor's primary concern regarding the defined organizational roles and responsibilities for supply chain continuity in this context, as per ISO 22318, 2015 principles? Option A. The insufficient number of personnel assigned to the supply chain continuity team. Option B. The lack of a documented succession plan for the continuity manager role. Option C. The absence of a specific risk assessment matrix for port closure scenarios. Option D. The potential for delayed or ineffective decision-making due to ambiguous authority levels during a critical incident. The correct answer is D. The potential for delayed or ineffective decision-making due to ambiguous authority levels during a critical incident. Explanation. The internal auditor's role in assessing supply chain continuity is to verify that the organization has established clear lines of authority and responsibility for managing continuity risks and implementing continuity plans. This includes ensuring that individuals are assigned specific roles, such as those responsible for risk assessment, plan development, testing, and incident response. The auditor must also confirm that these responsibilities are clearly communicated throughout the organization and that individuals have the necessary authority to execute their assigned tasks. A key aspect is to ensure that the management structure supports effective decision-making during a disruption. This involves checking if there are designated individuals or committees empowered to make critical decisions, allocate resources, and communicate with stakeholders during a continuity event. The auditor looks for evidence that the organization has defined who is accountable for the overall supply chain continuity program and who has the authority to activate and manage continuity plans. This aligns with the principles of good governance and the need for a structured approach to managing complex risks like supply chain disruptions. For instance, the auditor would examine documentation like organizational charts, job descriptions, and terms of reference for continuity committees to confirm that these roles, responsibilities, and authorities are formally recognized and understood within the organization's framework for supply chain resilience. Question 5. When auditing the business continuity management system of a multinational electronics manufacturer with a complex, multi-tiered global supply chain, which core BCM principle, as outlined by ISO 22318, 2015, must be thoroughly evaluated first to ensure the organization understands the potential impact of disruptions on its critical supply chain functions and their acceptable downtime. Option A. The comprehensiveness and accuracy of the business impact analysis, BIA, conducted for critical supply chain activities. Option B. The clarity and defined responsibilities of the crisis management team responsible for supply chain disruptions. Option C. The frequency and rigor of exercises and tests performed on the supply chain continuity plans. Option D. The effectiveness of the recovery strategies developed to address identified supply chain vulnerabilities. The correct answer is A. The comprehensiveness and accuracy of the business impact analysis, BIA, conducted for critical supply chain activities. Explanation. The fundamental principle of business continuity management, BCM, is the proactive identification, assessment, and mitigation of potential disruptions to an organization's operations, ensuring its ability to continue providing products or services at acceptable predefined levels following a disruptive incident. This involves establishing a robust framework that encompasses policy, program management, risk assessment, business impact analysis, strategy development, plan development, exercise and testing, and continuous improvement. The question probes the understanding of how BCM principles are applied in practice to maintain supply chain resilience. Specifically, it focuses on the critical initial phase of understanding the potential impact of disruptions on the supply chain's ability to deliver critical functions. A thorough business impact analysis, BIA, is paramount in identifying which supply chain activities are essential and the maximum tolerable downtime for each. This analysis informs the subsequent development of appropriate continuity strategies and plans. Without a comprehensive BIA, an organization cannot effectively prioritize resources or develop realistic recovery objectives, rendering its BCM efforts potentially ineffective against significant supply chain disruptions. The other options represent later stages or related but distinct activities within BCM. Developing recovery strategies follows the BIA, and while important, it's a consequence of the impact assessment. Exercising and testing plans are crucial for validating their effectiveness, but they occur after the plans are developed, which in turn relies on the BIA. Establishing a crisis management team is a component of the overall BCM framework, but does not, by itself, represent the foundational understanding of the impact of disruptions on critical supply chain functions. Question 6. During an internal audit of a global logistics provider's supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, based on ISO 22318-2015, an auditor observes that while a formal continuity policy exists, top management's direct involvement in reviewing the effectiveness of continuity plans and resource allocation for resilience initiatives appears minimal. The auditor notes that these reviews are primarily delegated to mid-level managers with limited authority to enact significant changes or secure substantial funding. Considering the requirements of ISO 22318-2015 regarding leadership and commitment, what is the most critical deficiency an auditor would identify in this scenario? Option A. Inadequate training provided to mid-level managers responsible for SCCMS oversight and execution. Option B. Over-reliance on external consultants for the development and validation of continuity plans. Option C. Lack of demonstrable top management commitment to the SCCMS, potentially undermining its authority and resource adequacy. Option D. Insufficient detail in the documented supply chain continuity policy, failing to cover all critical dependencies. The correct answer is C. Lack of demonstrable top management commitment to the SCCMS, potentially undermining its authority and resource adequacy. Explanation: ISO 22318-2015, specifically Clause 4.1 emphasizes that top management's commitment to establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, is a fundamental prerequisite. This commitment is not merely symbolic. It involves actively providing the necessary resources, setting the strategic direction, and fostering a culture that prioritizes resilience. An internal auditor assessing leadership and commitment would look for evidence of top management's engagement in critical SCCMS activities. This includes their participation in policy development, review of performance metrics, allocation of budget for continuity initiatives, and their role in communicating the importance of supply chain continuity throughout the organization. Without demonstrable leadership involvement, the SCCMS is likely to be perceived as a secondary concern, leading to inadequate resource allocation and a lack of organizational buy-in, thereby undermining its effectiveness. The auditor's role is to verify that this commitment translates into tangible actions and is not just a statement in a document. Question 7. An internal auditor is reviewing the supply chain continuity plan of a global logistics firm that handles time-sensitive medical supplies. The business impact analysis indicates that a disruption to the inventory tracking system could lead to significant financial losses and, more critically, jeopardize the delivery of vital medical goods if data is lost. The firm operates under stringent regulations that mandate traceability of all shipments. Considering the potential for severe reputational damage and regulatory noncompliance, which of the following recovery point objectives, RPO, for the inventory tracking system would be most appropriate and defensible according to the principles of ISO 22318-2015, assuming the firm has the technical capability to achieve it? Option A. A recovery point objective of up to 4 hours. Option B. A recovery point objective of 72 hours. Option C. A recovery point objective of no more than 15 minutes. Option D. A recovery point objective of 24 hours. The correct answer is C. A recovery point objective of no more than 15 minutes. Explanation. Establishing recovery point objectives, RPO, is a critical component of supply chain continuity planning, directly influencing the acceptable amount of data loss following a disruption. An RPO defines the maximum tolerable period in which data might be lost from an IT service due to a major incident. In the context of ISO 22318, 2015, the determination of RPOs is not an arbitrary decision, but a strategic one, driven by business impact analysis (BIA) and risk assessment. The BIA identifies critical business processes and the data they rely on, quantifying the impact of downtime and data loss over time. For instance, a financial transaction system might have a very low RPO, minutes or even seconds, because any loss of transaction data could have severe financial and reputational consequences, potentially violating regulatory requirements like those for financial reporting. Conversely, a less critical internal reporting system might tolerate a higher RPO hours or even a day, if the impact of losing a day's data is deemed manageable. The auditor's role is to verify that RPOs are established based on these documented analyses and that they align with the organization's overall risk appetite and resilience strategy. This involves reviewing the BIA risk assessments and documented RPO statements to ensure they are realistic, measurable, and achievable through the implemented recovery strategies. Furthermore, the auditor would check if the RPOs are communicated to relevant stakeholders and integrated into the testing and maintenance of the continuity plans. The goal is to ensure that the organization can recover to a state that is acceptable from a business perspective, minimizing the impact of disruptions. Question 8. When auditing an organization's supply chain continuity management system based on ISO 22318, 2015, an internal auditor is assessing the effectiveness of the monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation processes. The organization has implemented several key performance indicators, KPI, related to incident response times and recovery point objectives, RPO. What is the primary objective of the evaluation phase within this context for the auditor? Option A. To identify and document all potential supply chain vulnerabilities that were not captured during the initial risk assessment phase. Option B. To determine if the collected data on KPIs provides objective evidence of the supply chain continuity program's performance and compliance with defined objectives. Option C. To quantify the financial impact of all minor disruptions that occurred within the reporting period, regardless of their effect on critical functions. Option D. To develop new incident response procedures based on the raw data collected from the measurement phase, without further analysis. The correct answer is B. To determine if the collected data on KPIs provides objective evidence of the supply chain continuity program's performance and compliance with defined objectives. Explanation. The core of monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation within the context of ISO 22318-2015 for supply chain continuity auditors involves determining the effectiveness and performance of the established continuity program. This requires identifying appropriate metrics that reflect the organization's resilience and its ability to maintain critical functions during disruptions. For an internal auditor, the focus is on verifying that the organization has established a systematic process to collect data, analyze trends, and evaluate the outcomes against defined objectives. This includes assessing the suitability of the chosen performance indicators, KPI, and ensuring that the analysis provides actionable insights for improvement. The auditor must also consider how the organization uses this evaluated data to inform decision-making, update risk assessments, and refine its continuity plans. The objective is not merely to collect data, but to derive meaningful conclusions about the program's health and its alignment with business objectives and regulatory requirements, such as those pertaining to operational resilience and data protection, which may be influenced by frameworks like the GDPR or national cybersecurity directives, depending on the organization's operational scope. The evaluation phase should confirm that the organization can demonstrate the competence and effectiveness of its supply chain continuity management system through objective evidence derived from these monitored and analyzed activities. Question 9. During an internal audit of a global electronics manufacturer's supply chain continuity program, an auditor is reviewing the effectiveness of their testing and exercising regime, as per ISO 22318-2015. The manufacturer has recently conducted a series of exercises. Which of the following findings would indicate the most robust validation of their supply chain continuity plan's ability to manage a sudden, critical disruption affecting a key component supplier in Southeast Asia? Option A. The exercise involved a detailed review of the continuity plan documentation, identifying minor typographical errors and ensuring compliance with formatting standards. Option B. The exercise successfully simulated the communication protocols and activation of pre-approved alternative suppliers, validating the rapid deployment of secondary sourcing capabilities. Option C. The exercise focused on testing the IT infrastructure's resilience to cyber threats, which is a component of business continuity, but not directly validating the physical supply chain recovery from a supplier outage. Option D. The exercise consisted of a brief discussion among key personnel about potential scenarios without any practical simulation of operational responses or supplier engagement. The correct answer is B. The exercise successfully simulated the communication protocols and activation of pre-approved alternative suppliers, validating the rapid deployment of secondary sourcing capabilities. Explanation: ISO 22318-2015, specifically Clause 8.3 concerning testing and exercising, emphasizes the need for a structured approach to validate the effectiveness of a supply chain continuity program. When an internal auditor assesses the testing and exercising activities, they must consider the alignment with the organization's defined continuity objectives and the scope of the business continuity and supply chain continuity plans. The auditor should verify that the testing methodology chosen is appropriate for the specific risks and vulnerabilities identified within the supply chain. For instance, a tabletop exercise might be suitable for strategic decision-making during a disruption, while a functional exercise is better for testing specific operational capabilities, such as activating an alternate supplier or rerouting logistics. The explanation of the correct option centers on the auditor's role in ensuring that the chosen exercise type directly addresses and validates the critical components of the supply chain continuity plan, such as the identification and activation of critical suppliers, the effectiveness of communication protocols with these suppliers during a disruption, and the validation of alternative sourcing strategies. This ensures that the testing efforts are not merely procedural, but are genuinely aimed at building resilience and confirming the ability to maintain continuity of critical supply chain functions. The auditor must also confirm that lessons learned from previous exercises are incorporated into the design and execution of subsequent ones, thereby fostering continuous improvement. Question 10. When assessing the overall strategic advantages of a mature supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, conforming to ISO 22318-2015, which of the following outcomes represents the most profound and encompassing benefit for an organization operating in a volatile global marketplace? Option A. Reduced insurance premiums due to a documented history of minimal supply chain disruptions. Option B. Enhanced operational resilience and adaptive capacity, leading to sustained critical function delivery during and after disruptions. Option C. Improved supplier relationship management through standardized communication protocols for risk reporting. Option D. Streamlined regulatory compliance with international trade agreements concerning product traceability. The correct answer is B. Enhanced operational resilience and adaptive capacity, leading to sustained critical function delivery during and after disruptions. Explanation: the core benefit of a supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, aligned with ISO 22318-2015, is its ability to enhance an organization's resilience and adaptability in the face of disruptive events. This resilience stems from a systematic approach to identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks that could impact the flow of goods and services. By proactively establishing continuity plans, organizations can minimize the duration and impact of disruptions, thereby protecting their reputation, financial stability, and customer relationships. Furthermore, A well-implemented SCCMS fosters improved communication and coordination across the supply chain, involving suppliers, logistics providers, and internal departments. This collaborative effort strengthens the overall robustness of the supply chain. The standard emphasizes the integration of business continuity principles into the operational fabric, ensuring that critical functions can be maintained or restored rapidly. This proactive stance, rather than a reactive one, is a key differentiator and a significant advantage. It moves beyond mere risk transfer mechanisms like insurance, focusing on the operational capacity to withstand and recover from adverse events, which is a more fundamental and sustainable form of resilience. The systematic nature of the standard also facilitates compliance with various regulatory requirements related to business continuity and disaster recovery, which are increasingly prevalent across different jurisdictions and industries. Question 11. During an internal audit of a critical component supplier's adherence to ISO 22318-2015, the auditor observes that while the supplier has identified numerous potential disruptions, their documented mitigation strategies are generic and lack specific, actionable steps tailored to their unique manufacturing processes and logistical dependencies. Furthermore, the supplier has not conducted any recent simulations or exercises to validate the effectiveness of their proposed contingency plans. Considering the principles of supply chain resilience and the requirements for an effective continuity program under ISO 22318-2015, which finding would represent the most significant deficiency from an auditing perspective? Option A. The identification of a broad range of potential disruptions, even if some are considered low probability. Option B. Insufficient validation of mitigation strategies through practical exercises and lack of specific, actionable contingency plans tailored to the supplier's operational context. Option C. The existence of documented mitigation strategies, regardless of their specificity or testing. Option D. The supplier's reliance on general industry best practices for their continuity planning. The correct answer is B. Insufficient validation of mitigation strategies through practical exercises and lack of specific, actionable contingency plans tailored to the supplier's operational context. Explanation: the core of ISO 22318-2015 is establishing and maintaining a robust supply chain continuity capability. This standard emphasizes a proactive approach to identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks that could disrupt the flow of goods and services. When auditing a supplier's continuity program against this standard, an auditor must evaluate the effectiveness of their risk management processes. This includes not just identifying potential threats, but also the implementation of controls and contingency plans designed to minimize the impact of disruptions and facilitate rapid recovery. The focus is on the demonstrated ability of the supplier to maintain critical functions and services throughout a disruptive event. Therefore, an auditor would look for evidence of a structured risk assessment methodology, documented mitigation strategies, and tested recovery procedures. The ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances, a key aspect of resilience, is demonstrated through the integration of these elements into the supplier's operational framework and their regular review and enhancement. This proactive stance, embedded within the supplier's management system, is what signifies a mature approach to supply chain continuity, as per the standard's intent. Question 12. When developing an internal audit program for a complex global supply chain, what primary considerations should an internal auditor prioritize to ensure comprehensive coverage and effectiveness in assessing the organization's supply chain continuity management system, in alignment with ISO 22318-2015 principles? Option A. The criticality of supply chain segments, the complexity of relationships, identified risks and their impact, and the results of prior audits. Option B. The chronological order of supply chain disruptions experienced and the number of employees in the procurement department. Option C. The personal preferences of senior management regarding audit focus areas and the availability of marketing materials. Option D. The alphabetical order of key suppliers and the geographic location of the organization's headquarters. Correct answer is A. The criticality of supply chain segments, the complexity of relationships, identified risks and their impact, and the results of prior audits. Explanation: the internal audit program for supply chain continuity, as guided by principles aligned with ISO 22318-2015, necessitates a structured approach to planning and execution. This program's effectiveness hinges on its ability to systematically evaluate the organization's supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, against defined criteria, which include organizational policies, procedures, and relevant legal and regulatory requirements. When establishing the frequency and scope of internal audits, an auditor must consider several critical factors. These include the criticality of the supply chain segments being audited, the complexity of the supply chain relationships, the identified risks and their potential impact on continuity, and the outcomes of previous audits. A risk-based approach is paramount. Therefore, segments with higher inherent risks or those that have undergone significant changes are typically audited more frequently. Furthermore, the availability of resources, both human and financial, influences the practical implementation of the audit schedule. The program should also be dynamic, allowing for adjustments based on emerging threats or changes in the business environment. For instance, a sudden geopolitical event impacting a key supplier would necessitate a review and potential adjustment of the audit schedule to focus on the affected supply chain nodes. The program's design must also ensure that it covers all essential components of the SCCMS, from initial risk assessment and business impact analysis to the development and testing of continuity plans and the communication strategies employed. The overarching goal is to provide assurance that the SCCMS is effectively designed, implemented, and maintained to ensure the resilience of the supply chain. Question 13. Consider a scenario where a severe cyber attack has crippled the digital infrastructure of a key supplier, halting the production of essential raw materials. An internal auditor is evaluating the organization's supply chain continuity plan concerning incident response and recovery. Which of the following actions, if identified as the primary focus during the audit of the incident response phase, would indicate the most robust adherence to the principles of ISO 22318 for this specific type of disruption? Option A. Assessment of the financial reserves allocated for emergency procurement and expedited shipping to cover potential increased costs during the recovery period. Option B. Verification that the incident response team has initiated communication protocols with alternative suppliers identified in the business continuity plan and has begun assessing the feasibility of rerouting existing inventory. Option C. Review of the incident log to ensure that all actions taken by the incident response team are meticulously documented for post-incident analysis. Option D. Confirmation that the crisis communication plan has been activated to inform all stakeholders, including customers and regulatory bodies, about the potential impact on product availability. The correct answer is B. Verification that the incident response team has initiated communication protocols with alternative suppliers identified in the business continuity plan and has begun assessing the feasibility of rerouting existing inventory. Explanation: the core of incident response and recovery planning in supply chain continuity, as guided by principles aligned with ISO 22318, involves establishing clear communication channels and defined roles for crisis management. When a disruptive event occurs, such as a major port closure impacting the delivery of critical components, the immediate priority is to activate the predefined incident response team. This team, comprising individuals with designated responsibilities from various functional areas, e.g., logistics, procurement, operations, legal, is crucial for coordinating the initial assessment of the incident's impact. Following the assessment, the team initiates the pre-approved recovery strategies. These strategies are designed to mitigate the disruption and restore affected supply chain functions to an acceptable operational level within a defined timeframe. A key aspect of effective recovery is the ability to seamlessly transition from incident response to ongoing business as usual, or a modified version thereof, while ensuring that lessons learned are incorporated into future planning. This cyclical process of preparation, response, and review is fundamental to maintaining supply chain resilience. Question 14. An internal auditor is evaluating the supply chain continuity program of a multinational electronics manufacturer that recently shifted significant production from Southeast Asia to Mexico, nearshoring, and brought a critical component manufacturing back to the United States, Reshoring. Which of the following aspects is the most critical for the auditor to assess regarding the effectiveness of these strategic sourcing changes in enhancing supply chain continuity, considering potential impacts on regulatory compliance and operational resilience? Option A. The market share fluctuations and competitive landscape changes that may have influenced the decision to nearshore and reshore production facilities. Option B. The integration of new local regulatory compliance requirements and the updated risk mitigation strategies for the nearshored and reshored facilities into the organization's overall business continuity plans. Option C. The cost-benefit analysis performed by the company to justify the financial implications of nearshoring and reshoring, including labor, logistics, and tariff considerations. Option D. The communication protocols established between the newly established domestic and nearshore manufacturing sites and the original offshore suppliers to ensure continued information flow. The correct answer is B. The integration of new local regulatory compliance requirements and the updated risk mitigation strategies for the nearshored and reshored facilities into the organization's overall business continuity plans. Explanation. ISO 22318, 2015 focuses on the continuity of supply chains, which includes assessing and managing risks associated with sourcing strategies. Nearshoring, the practice of moving business operations to a nearby country, and reshoring, bringing operations back to the home country, are strategic responses to global supply chain disruptions. An internal auditor assessing a supply chain continuity program must evaluate how these strategies impact the organization's resilience and ability to maintain operations during disruptions. When considering the impact of nearshoring and reshoring on supply chain continuity, an auditor needs to look beyond just geographical proximity. Key considerations include the potential for increased visibility and control over operations, which can reduce lead times and improve responsiveness to disruptions. However, these strategies might also involve higher labor or operational costs, which need to be balanced against the enhanced resilience. Furthermore, the auditor must assess whether the organization has adequately updated its business continuity plans, BCP, and disaster recovery plans, DRP, to reflect the new operational footprint, including new supplier relationships, transportation routes, and regulatory environments. For instance, a shift to nearshoring might introduce new compliance requirements related to labor laws or environmental regulations in the host country, which must be integrated into the BCP. The auditor's role is to verify that the organization has systematically identified, analyzed, and mitigated the risks associated with these strategic sourcing changes, ensuring that the supply chain remains robust and capable of meeting its objectives even when faced with unforeseen events. This involves reviewing documentation, interviewing personnel, and observing processes to confirm that the continuity objectives are being met under the new operational model. Question 15. During an audit of a global electronics manufacturer's supply chain continuity program, an internal auditor discovered that while the company had robust internal business continuity plans, there was a significant lack of documented assurance regarding the continuity capabilities of its Tier 2 suppliers, who provide essential specialized components. The manufacturer had not formally requested or reviewed the continuity plans of these Tier 2 suppliers, relying solely on their contractual obligations to deliver, which specific aspect of ISO 22318, 2015, Clause 8, operation, is most likely being inadequately addressed in this scenario. Option A. Ensuring that all supply chain continuity documentation is stored in a single, unencrypted digital repository accessible by all employees. Option B. Developing and implementing communication strategies for supply chain disruptions that are limited to internal emergency response teams and senior management. Option C. Conducting periodic reviews of the organization's own internal operational resilience without considering the impact of external supplier failures. Option D. Establishing and maintaining supply chain continuity processes that integrate with the organization's overall business continuity management system, including verifying the resilience of critical external dependencies. The correct answer is D. Establishing and maintaining supply chain continuity processes that integrate with the organization's overall business continuity management system, including verifying the resilience of critical external dependencies. Explanation. The core of Clause 8 of ISO 22318, 2015 focuses on the operational aspects of supply chain continuity. This involves establishing, implementing, and maintaining the processes necessary to achieve supply chain continuity objectives. Specifically, it mandates the identification and management of critical supply chain functions, the development of continuity plans for these functions, and the integration of these plans into the organization's overall business continuity management system. An internal auditor, when assessing compliance with Clause 8, must verify that the organization has a systematic approach to identifying potential disruptions, assessing their impact on critical supply chain elements, and implementing appropriate preventative and responsive measures. This includes ensuring that the organization has documented procedures for managing supplier relationships, verifying the continuity capabilities of key suppliers, and establishing communication protocols with all relevant stakeholders during a disruption. The auditor would look for evidence of risk assessment specific to the supply chain, the existence of incident response plans that address supply chain disruptions, and the integration of supply chain continuity considerations into the design and operation of the supply chain itself. Furthermore, the auditor must confirm that the organization conducts regular reviews and updates of its supply chain continuity plans to reflect changes in the business environment, threats, and the supply chain's own structure. The effectiveness of training and awareness programs for personnel involved in supply chain operations and continuity management is also a key audit point. The scenario presented highlights a failure to proactively engage with critical suppliers to understand their continuity plans, which directly contravenes the intent of Clause 8 to ensure resilience throughout the entire supply chain, not just within the organization's own direct control. Question 16. During an internal audit of a critical component supplier's supply chain continuity arrangements, an auditor is reviewing the supplier's preparedness for potential disruptions to their primary shipping routes. The supplier's documentation indicates they have identified risks related to port congestion and labor actions affecting maritime transport. Which of the following audit actions would be most effective in verifying the supplier's ability to maintain continuity of supply for the auditee organization? Option A. Requesting a presentation from the supplier's logistics manager detailing their general understanding of global supply chain risks. Option B. Examining the supplier's financial statements to assess their overall financial stability and capacity to absorb disruptions. Option C. Reviewing documented evidence of the supplier's testing of alternative logistics providers and contingency transportation methods for critical shipments. Option D. Verifying the supplier's compliance with standard shipping regulation and customs procedures for all international movements. The correct answer is C. Reviewing documented evidence of the supplier's testing of alternative logistics providers and contingency transportation methods for critical shipments. Explanation. The core principle of auditing, as applied to supply chain continuity according to ISO 22318-2015, is to verify the effectiveness and adherence to established plans and procedures. When auditing the resilience of a critical component supplier's logistics network, an internal auditor must focus on evidence that demonstrates the supplier's ability to maintain continuity of supply under disruptive conditions. This involves examining the supplier's documented business continuity plans, BCP, specifically those pertaining to logistics and transportation. The auditor would look for evidence of risk assessments conducted by the supplier that identify potential disruptions to their supply chain, such as geopolitical instability, natural disasters affecting transportation routes, or labor disputes at key transit points. Furthermore, the auditor needs to assess the supplier's mitigation strategies and contingency plans. This includes verifying the existence of alternative transportation providers, backup warehousing facilities, and prearranged agreements for expedited shipping or alternative modes of transport. The auditor would also review records of past exercises or tests of these contingency plans to gauge their practicality and effectiveness. The objective is not to redesign the supplier's BCP, but to confirm that it is documented, implemented, and capable of addressing identified risks to the continuity of supply for the auditee organization. Therefore, the most appropriate action for the auditor is to verify the existence and documented testing of these specific contingency measures within the supplier's logistics continuity plans. Question 17. An internal auditor is assessing the supply chain continuity program for a global electronics manufacturer. The organization relies heavily on a single, specialized component for its flagship product, sourced from a supplier located in a region prone to seismic activity, which supply chain continuity strategy, when implemented, most directly addresses the risk of disruption to this critical component's availability due to a natural disaster impacting the sole supplier. Option A. Enhancing the resilience of the primary supplier's facility through investment in advanced seismic retrofitting and disaster recovery planning. Option B. Implementing an agile inventory management system that allows for rapid reallocation of existing stock to different manufacturing lines based on real-time demand signals. Option C. Establishing redundant supply channels for the critical component by qualifying and contracting with at least one additional geographically distinct supplier. Option D. Developing a robust business continuity plan that focuses on communicating the disruption to downstream customers and managing their expectations. The correct answer is C. Establishing redundant supply channels for the critical component by qualifying and contracting with at least one additional geographically distinct supplier. Explanation. The core principle of supply chain continuity is the ability to maintain operations and deliver products or services despite disruptions. When considering strategies to enhance this, the concept of redundancy is paramount. Redundancy, in this context, refers to having alternative resources, suppliers, or pathways that can be activated if the primary ones fail. This is distinct from resilience, which is the inherent ability to withstand and recover from shocks, and agility, which is the capacity to adapt quickly to changes. Diversification is a broader strategy that can encompass redundancy, but also includes other forms of spreading risk, such as market diversification. Therefore, building multiple, independent sourcing options for critical components is a direct application of redundancy to mitigate the impact of a single supplier failure, thereby strengthening the overall continuity of the supply chain. This aligns with the proactive measures an internal auditor would look for to ensure the organization's ability to operate during unforeseen events, as stipulated by the principles of ISO 22318, 2015. Question 18. When conducting an internal audit of a company's supply chain continuity program, focusing on supplier diversification as a risk mitigation strategy, what is the primary indicator of an effective diversification approach according to ISO 22318, 2015 principles? Option A. The ability of alternative suppliers to absorb a significant portion of the primary supplier's demand within a predefined critical response time. Option B. The existence of a greater number of registered suppliers for key raw materials, regardless of their production capacity or contractual obligations for surge capacity. Option C. The successful negotiation of lower unit prices with multiple suppliers due to increased competition, even if it doesn't directly address disruption response. Option D. The documented identification of potential alternative suppliers without verification of their operational readiness or commitment to emergency supply agreements. The correct answer is A. The ability of alternative suppliers to absorb a significant portion of the primary supplier's demand within a predefined critical response time. Explanation. The core principle of supplier diversification and supply chain continuity, as per ISO 22318, 2015, is to mitigate risks arising from over-reliance on a single source. When assessing the effectiveness of a diversification strategy, an internal auditor must evaluate how well the alternative suppliers can absorb the demand in case of a disruption affecting the primary supplier. This involves considering not just the existence of multiple suppliers, but their capacity, reliability, geographical location, and contractual agreements. A strategy that solely focuses on increasing the number of suppliers without ensuring their capability to scale up production or service delivery in a crisis would be insufficient. For instance, if a critical component is sourced from a primary supplier that experiences a catastrophic event, the alternative suppliers must be able to meet the increased demand without significant lead time extensions or quality degradation. This requires a thorough understanding of the supply chain's resilience and the operational capacity of all designated suppliers. The auditor would look for evidence of demand-sharing agreements, pre-qualification of alternative suppliers for increased volume, and testing of these alternative supply routes. The objective is to ensure that the diversification strategy provides a tangible and immediate alternative, rather than merely a theoretical option. This aligns with the standard's emphasis on ensuring that continuity plans are practical and actionable. Question 19. A medical device manufacturer, reliant on a single, specialized supplier for a critical microcontroller, experiences an unexpected and prolonged disruption at that supplier's facility due to a regional natural disaster. The manufacturer's business continuity plan has identified and pre-qualified several alternative suppliers for this component. Considering the principles of ISO 22318, 2015 for supply chain continuity, what is the most appropriate immediate action to ensure continued production of vital medical devices? Option A. Rely solely on existing buffer stock of the microcontrollers, assuming the disruption will be brief. Option B. Initiate the activation of a pre-qualified alternative supplier to secure the necessary microcontrollers. Option C. Immediately begin an extensive search for entirely new, unvetted suppliers to replace the disrupted source. Option D. Commence urgent negotiations with the primary, disrupted supplier to understand the timeline for their operational recovery. The correct answer is B. Initiate the activation of a pre-qualified alternative supplier to secure the necessary microcontrollers. Explanation. The scenario describes a disruption affecting a critical supplier of specialized electronic components for a medical device manufacturer. The manufacturer has a business continuity plan, BCP, that includes strategies for supply chain resilience. Question asks about the most appropriate immediate action for maintaining continuity of operations, considering the principles of ISO 22318, 2015. ISO 22318, 2015 emphasizes proactive identification and mitigation of supply chain risks. When a primary supplier is disrupted, activating pre-identified alternative sourcing options is a key strategy. These options should be established and vetted during the BCP development and testing phases. Activating a pre-qualified secondary supplier, who has already undergone due diligence regarding their own continuity capabilities and quality standards, is the most effective immediate step to mitigate the impact of the primary supplier's failure. This ensures that the manufacturer can continue to procure essential components without significant delays or quality compromises. Other options, such as immediately seeking new, unvetted suppliers, would introduce significant risks and delays. Relying solely on inventory without a plan for replenishment is a short-term fix. Engaging in a lengthy negotiation with the disrupted supplier might not yield immediate results. Therefore, activating a pre-established alternative sourcing channel is the most robust and compliant response. Question 20. Consider a scenario where a sudden geopolitical event in a key sourcing region causes a 72-hour complete halt in operations for 30% of a company's critical component suppliers. The company's established business continuity plan, BCP, for supply chain disruptions had set a recovery time objective RTO of 48 hours for critical manufacturing processes and a recovery point objective RPO of 12 hours for inventory data integrity. Following the event, the company managed to resume partial operations after 60 hours, but full recovery of all impacted supplier relationships and data systems took 96 hours. During the disruption, production of a key product line, which generates an average daily revenue of $50,000, was reduced by 50%. Additionally, the company incurred $25,000 in expedited freight costs to secure alternative components and faced a potential $15,000 penalty for a delayed customer order due to the disruption. What is the most accurate assessment of the BCP's effectiveness in relation to its stated objectives and the actual impact experienced, considering the principles of ISO 22318, 2015? Option A. The BCP was moderately effective, meeting the RPO but exceeding the RTO by 24 hours, resulting in financial losses that were within acceptable variance limits for operational disruptions. Option B. The BCP was partially effective as it mitigated the disruption within the RPO, but failed to meet the RTO for critical manufacturing processes, leading to significant financial and operational deviations from the plan. Option C. The BCP was ineffective as it did not account for geopolitical events, and the financial loss exceeded projected worst-case scenarios outlined in the plan. Option D. The BCP was highly effective as the actual recovery time was within the RPO, and the financial impact was adequately managed through contingency funds. The correct answer is B. The BCP was partially effective as it mitigated the disruption within the RPO, but failed to meet the RTO for critical manufacturing processes, leading to significant financial and operational deviations from the plan. Explanation: the calculation for determining the total financial impact of a supply chain disruption involves summing the direct costs associated with the disruption, such as emergency procurement expenses and repair costs, with the indirect costs, which represent lost revenue due to inability to fulfill orders and damage to brand reputation. Operational impacts are assessed by quantifying the duration of the disruption, the percentage of affected supply chain nodes, and the severity of the interruption on critical business processes. For disruption lasting 72 hours, affecting 30% of key suppliers, and causing a 50% reduction in production capacity for a critical product line, the financial impact would be calculated by first determining the lost revenue per hour. If the daily revenue for this product line is $50,000, then the hourly revenue is approximately $2,083. 33. A 72-hour disruption would lead to a direct revenue loss of $72 text hours times $2,083. 33 text hour equals $150,000. Added to this are potential costs for expedited shipping and overtime labor. Let's assume $25,000. The indirect financial impact also includes potential penalties for late deliveries and the cost of customer retention efforts, estimated at $150,000. Therefore, the total financial impact is $150,000 lost revenue plus $25,000 direct costs plus $10,000 indirect costs equals $185,000. The operational impact is measured by the 72-hour downtime and the 50% reduction in production, signifying a significant disruption to planned output. When evaluating the effectiveness of a business continuity plan, BCP, following a specific incident, an internal auditor for supply chain continuity, adhering to ISO 22318-2015, would focus on how well the plan's recovery time objectives, RTO, and recovery point objectives, RPO, were met. The auditor would compare the actual recovery duration and data loss against the predefined RTOs and RPOs established in the BCP. For instance, if the BCP stipulated an RTO of 48 hours for critical manufacturing operations and an RPO of 12 hours for inventory data, but the actual recovery took 72 hours, and resulted in a data loss equivalent to 24 hours of transactions, the auditor would identify a significant nonconformance. This nonconformance indicates a failure to meet the plan's objectives and highlights areas for improvement. The auditor would also consider regulatory compliance, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, if personal data was compromised, which could incur substantial fines and reputational damage, further compounding the financial and operational impact. The auditor's report would detail these discrepancies, assess the root causes, and recommend corrective actions to enhance the resilience and effectiveness of the supply chain continuity arrangements. Question 21. An internal auditor reviewing a global electronics manufacturer's supply chain continuity plan, which relies heavily on a single offshore manufacturing partner for its primary microchip component, needs to assess the effectiveness of their mitigation strategies against potential disruptions. Considering the principles of ISO 22318-2015, which of the following strategies would most directly address the inherent risk of a single point of failure in this scenario by providing a readily available alternative capability? Option A. Developing a comprehensive communication protocol with the primary supplier to ensure timely notification of any potential production issues. Option B. Negotiating longer lead times with the primary supplier to build up a larger buffer stock of microchips. Option C. Implementing a more rigorous quality control process with the existing offshore manufacturer to reduce the likelihood of component defects. Option D. Establishing a secondary, smaller-scale manufacturing agreement with a different, geographically distant partner for the same microchip component. The correct answer is D. Establishing a secondary, smaller-scale manufacturing agreement with a different, geographically distant partner for the same microchip component. Explanation: the effectiveness of a supply chain continuity strategy hinges on its ability to anticipate and mitigate disruptions. Redundancy, in the context of supply chain continuity, refers to the establishment of backup or alternative resources, processes, or suppliers to ensure operational resilience. This can manifest as maintaining multiple suppliers for critical components, having backup manufacturing facilities, or holding buffer stock of essential materials. The core principle is to have viable alternatives readily available should the primary supply chain element fail. For instance, if a primary logistics provider experiences a widespread strike, a pre-established agreement with a secondary provider ensures that goods can still be transported, thereby minimizing the impact on downstream operations and customer delivery. This strategic deployment of backup capabilities directly addresses the potential for single points of failure within the complex web of a supply chain. Key consideration for any ISO 22318, 2015 internal auditor assessing the robustness of continuity plans. Other strategies like diversification of supplier base or geographical dispersion of operations are related but distinct concepts. Diversification focuses on spreading risk across different entities, while geographical dispersion aims to reduce the impact of localized events. Redundancy specifically emphasizes having duplicate or parallel operational capacities. Question 22. During an internal audit of a global electronics manufacturer's supply chain continuity management system, an auditor is assessing how the organization has incorporated external legal and regulatory requirements into its framework. The manufacturer operates in multiple jurisdictions, including the European Union, which has the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the United States, with the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2015. Considering the interconnected nature of modern supply chains and the potential for disruptions originating from data breaches or noncompliance with privacy laws affecting logistics partners, which of the following best represent the auditor's focus in evaluating the organization's understanding of its context in relation to these specific external requirements? Option A. Confirming that the organization has conducted a comprehensive risk assessment of its entire supply chain, regardless of specific regulatory impacts. Option B. Reviewing the organization's internal policies on employee training for cybersecurity awareness, independent of external legal mandates. Option C. Verifying that the organization has identified all relevant privacy and cybersecurity regulations applicable to its supply chain partners and has established mechanisms to ensure their compliance within the SCMS. Option D. Assessing the organization's financial reserves allocated for potential fines due to non-compliance with any environmental regulations impacting raw material sourcing. Correct answer is C. Verifying that the organization has identified all relevant privacy and cybersecurity regulations applicable to its supply chain partners and has established mechanisms to ensure their compliance within the SCMS. Explanation: the internal auditor's role in understanding the organization and its context, as per ISO 22318, 2015, involves a comprehensive review of internal and external factors that could impact the organization's ability to maintain supply chain continuity. This includes identifying stakeholders and their requirements, understanding the scope and boundaries of the Supply Chain Continuity Management System, SCMS, and recognizing the legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations the organization must adhere to. For instance, a firm operating in the pharmaceutical sector might need to consider regulations like the Good Distribution Practice, GDP guidelines, which mandate specific environmental controls and traceability throughout the supply chain to ensure product integrity and patient safety. An auditor would assess how these external requirements are integrated into the SCMS. Similarly, internal factors such as the organization's strategic objectives, its existing risk appetite, its organizational structure, and the availability of resources, human, financial, technological, are crucial for establishing a robust SCMS. The auditor must evaluate whether the organization has systematically identified and analyzed these elements to inform the design and implementation of its SCMS. This analysis is foundational for determining the appropriate level of supply chain resilience and the types of disruptive events that need to be considered. The process is iterative, requiring the auditor to confirm that the understanding of context is regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changes in the business environment and organizational strategy. The auditor's objective is to ensure that the SCMS is aligned with the organization's overall purpose and strategic direction, and that it effectively addresses the identified internal and external issues relevant to supply chain continuity. Question 23. An internal auditor is reviewing the business continuity plans for a global electronics manufacturer following a disruption at a key component supplier. The auditor needs to assess the appropriateness of the established recovery time objectives, RTO, for the assembly and distribution functions. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 22318/2015, what is the most direct and fundamental basis for determining these RTOs? Option A. The results of the business impact analysis that quantify the maximum acceptable downtime for each function. Option B. The contractual obligations with major clients regarding delivery timelines and service level agreements. Option C. The perceived urgency of restoring operations by senior management, irrespective of detailed impact assessment. Option D. The technical capabilities of the IT department to restore critical systems within a specified timeframe. The correct answer is A. The results of the business impact analysis that quantify the maximum acceptable downtime for each function. Explanation. When establishing recovery time objectives, RTO, for critical business functions within a supply chain, an internal auditor must consider various factors to ensure the RTO is realistic and aligns with the organization's overall business continuity strategy. ISO 22318/2015 emphasizes that RTOs are derived from business impact analysis (BIA). The BIA identifies critical functions, assesses their potential impact if disrupted, and determines the maximum tolerable downtime. This maximum tolerable downtime is the basis for the RTO. Therefore, the primary driver for setting an RTO is the outcome of the BIA, specifically the point at which the impact of a disruption becomes unacceptable. Other factors such as regulatory requirements, contractual obligations, and the availability of resources for recovery are important considerations that inform the feasibility of achieving a particular RTO. But the RTO itself is fundamentally determined by the business's tolerance for disruption as quantified in the BIA. The ability to meet an RTO also depends on the chosen recovery strategies and the technical capabilities to implement them, but the objective itself is set by the business need. Question 24. During an internal audit of a multinational logistics firm's supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS, compliant with ISO 22318/2015, an auditor is evaluating the adequacy of the resources allocated to maintain critical logistics hubs during widespread adverse weather events. The firm operates in regions with varying regulatory requirements concerning environmental impact and worker safety. Which of the following auditor approaches would most effectively verify that the organization's human, infrastructure, and environmental resources are truly adequate and suitable for maintaining critical supply chain functions during such disruptions? Option A. Verify that the organization has identified potential resource gaps through a risk assessment process, but without confirming whether the identified mitigation strategies for these gaps are actively implemented and effective in practice. Option B. Assess the documented evidence of resource allocation, training effectiveness for personnel handling disruptions, infrastructure resilience testing, and adherence to relevant environmental and safety regulations to determine their direct contribution to the SCCMS ability to achieve intended outcomes during disruptions. Option C. Review the organization's budget allocations for resource acquisition and maintenance, comparing them against industry benchmarks for supply chain continuity without verifying the actual operational effectiveness of these resources. Option D. Examine the historical performance data of the SCCMS during past minor disruptions, focusing primarily on the efficiency of resource deployment rather than the overall suitability of the resources for more severe, hypothetical scenarios. The correct answer is B. Assess the documented evidence of resource allocation, training effectiveness for personnel handling disruptions, infrastructure resilience testing, and adherence to relevant environmental and safety regulations to determine their direct contribution to the SCCMS ability to achieve intended outcomes during disruptions. Explanation. The core principle tested here is the auditor's role in verifying the adequacy and suitability of resources for supply chain continuity, specifically within the context of ISO 22318-2015. Clause 7. 1. One of ISO 22318-2015 mandates that an organization shall determine, provide, and maintain the necessary resources for the establishment, implementation, operation, monitoring, review, maintenance, and improvement of its supply chain continuity management system, SCCMS. This encompasses human resources, competence, awareness training, infrastructure facilities, equipment, technology, and the environment, physical and social conditions. When an auditor assesses the adequacy of these resources, they must focus on how effectively these resources support the organization's ability to maintain critical supply chain functions during disruptions. The auditor needs to evaluate whether the identified resources are not only available, but also appropriate for the scale and complexity of the supply chain operations and the potential threats. This involves examining documented evidence of resource allocation, training records, infrastructure maintenance logs, and environmental risk assessments, and critically, assessing their alignment with the SCCMS objectives and the organization's business continuity strategy. The auditor's objective is to confirm that the resources are sufficient to enable the organization to respond to, recover from, and resume its supply chain activities within defined acceptable timeframes, thereby ensuring continuity. Therefore, the most comprehensive and appropriate approach for an auditor to verify the adequacy of resources is to assess their direct contribution to the SCCMS ability to achieve its intended outcomes during disruptions, which inherently includes evaluating their suitability for maintaining critical functions. Question 25. An internal auditor is assessing the effectiveness of an organization's early warning system for supply chain continuity, as outlined in ISO 22318-2015. The system primarily monitors financial market volatility and currency exchange rates to predict potential supplier financial distress. Which of the following assessment findings would indicate the most significant deficiency in the system's adherence to the standard's principles for proactive disruption detection? Option A. The system incorporates real-time logistics tracking data alongside supplier performance metrics to identify potential delivery delays. Option B. The system includes a mechanism for analyzing news feeds and social media sentiment related to key supplier regions for early signs of instability. Option C. The system relies predominantly on a single data stream, such as financial market indicators, without integrating diverse operational and geopolitical risk intelligence. Option D. The system's alert thresholds are clearly defined and regularly reviewed by a cross-functional team, ensuring timely and relevant notifications. The correct answer is C. The system relies predominantly on a single data stream, such as financial market indicators, without integrating diverse operational and geopolitical risk intelligence. Explanation. The core of implementing an effective early warning system for supply chain continuity, as per ISO 22318-2015, lies in establishing robust mechanisms for monitoring and analyzing potential disruptions. This involves identifying critical supply chain nodes, understanding their vulnerabilities, and defining triggers for action. The effectiveness of such a system is not solely dependent on the technical sophistication of the monitoring tools, but critically on the integration of diverse data sources and the clarity of the defined response protocols. A system that relies on a single isolated data stream, such as only financial market indicators, would be insufficient because it fails to capture the multifaceted nature of supply chain risks, which can stem from geopolitical events, natural disasters, cyber threats, or supplier insolvency. A comprehensive approach mandates the aggregation and correlation of information from various channels, including supplier performance metrics, logistics tracking, regulatory updates, and even social media sentiment analysis related to key operational regions or commodities. The ability to cross-reference these signals and identify converging patterns is paramount for accurate and timely alerts. Furthermore, the established thresholds for triggering an alert must be clearly defined and regularly reviewed to ensure they remain relevant and actionable, reflecting the dynamic nature of global supply chains and potential threats. The system's success hinges on its capacity to provide actionable intelligence that allows for proactive mitigation strategies before a disruption fully materializes. Question 26. An internal auditor is reviewing the supply chain continuity plan of a global logistics provider. The auditor has noted that the established recovery point objectives, RPO, for the company's inventory tracking system are set at 24 hours. However, during the audit, it was revealed that the process for determining this RPO involved selecting the longest interval between backups that the current, cost-effective backup software could reliably manage, without a formal assessment of the business impact of losing up to 24 hours of inventory data, or considering specific regulatory requirements for real-time tracking in certain jurisdictions. Which of the following most accurately reflects the auditor's finding regarding the RPO setting process for the inventory tracking system? Option A. The RPO setting process is likely inadequate as it prioritizes technical and cost constraints over a business-driven impact and risk assessment, potentially failing to meet actual business needs and regulatory obligations. Option B. The RPO setting process is appropriate as a 24-hour RPO is a standard benchmark for most critical business systems in the logistics industry. Option C. The RPO setting process is robust because it leverages the maximum capability of the current backup infrastructure, ensuring operational feasibility. Option D. The RPO setting process is sufficient because it is documented within the company's IT infrastructure policy, indicating compliance. The correct answer is A. The RPO setting process is likely inadequate as it prioritizes technical and cost constraints over a business-driven impact and risk assessment, potentially failing to meet actual business needs and regulatory obligations. Explanation: the establishment of recovery point objectives, RPO, is a critical component of supply chain continuity planning, as defined by standards like ISO 22318, 2015. An RPO specifies the maximum tolerable period in which data or business processes can be lost from an IT service due to a disruptive incident. When an auditor assesses the effectiveness of an organization's RPO setting process, they must verify that the RPOs are not arbitrarily determined, but are derived from a thorough analysis of business impact and risk. This analysis involves understanding the criticality of different data sets and operational functions, the potential financial and reputational damage associated with data loss, and the technical capabilities for data backup and recovery. For instance, a core transaction processing system might require an RPO of minutes, meaning only a very small amount of data loss is acceptable. Conversely, a non-critical reporting database might tolerate an RPO of days. The auditor's role is to ensure that the chosen RPOs are realistic, aligned with the organization's risk appetite, and supported by documented business continuity strategies and technical solutions. A key aspect is the validation that these RPOs are regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changes in business operations. Regulatory requirements, such as data retention laws or industry-specific compliance mandates, and technological advancements. Therefore, an RPO that is primarily driven by the capabilities of the cheapest available backup solution, without a corresponding business impact assessment, would be considered insufficient and not in alignment with best practices for robust supply chain continuity. The process must prioritize business needs and risk tolerance over purely technical or cost-driven decisions. Question 27. During an internal audit of a manufacturing firm's supply chain continuity management system, an auditor is reviewing the procedures for a critical component supplier located in a geologically unstable region. The firm has established a comprehensive communication protocol for this supplier, detailing notification triggers, communication channels, and escalation matrices for disruptions. The auditor's primary objective in this aspect of the audit is to ascertain whether this communication protocol adequately fosters the necessary awareness among all involved parties regarding potential disruptions and their respective roles in mitigating impacts, thereby ensuring the effectiveness of the supply chain continuity arrangements, as per ISO 22318, 2015. Which of the following best represents the auditor's focus in evaluating this communication protocol? Option A. Ensuring that the communication protocol includes provisions for public relations announcements in the event of a significant supply chain disruption. Option B. verifying that the communication protocol effectively disseminates relevant information to ensure timely and appropriate responses from both the organization and the critical supplier during a disruption. Option C, confirming that the communication protocol adheres to all mandatory reporting requirements stipulated by regional logistical regulations. Option D, assessing the cost-effectiveness of the communication channels employed in the protocol against industry benchmarks for supplier communication. The correct answer is B, verifying that the communication protocol effectively disseminates relevant information to ensure timely and appropriate responses from both the organization and the critical supplier during a disruption. Explanation: the scenario describes an internal audit of a supply chain continuity management system. The auditor is assessing the organization's adherence to ISO 22318-2015, specifically concerning the competence, awareness, and communication requirements. The organization has identified a critical supplier in a region prone to seismic activity. To ensure awareness, the organization has developed a detailed communication plan for this supplier, outlining notification procedures in case of a disruption. This plan includes specifying the channels of communication, escalation points, and the frequency of updates during an incident. The auditor's role is to verify that this communication plan effectively addresses the specific risks associated with the supplier's location and the potential impact on the organization's continuity. The communication plan's effectiveness is judged by its ability to ensure that relevant personnel, both within the organization and at the supplier, are aware of the situation, understand their roles, and can take appropriate actions promptly. This aligns with the standard's emphasis on ensuring that personnel have the necessary understanding of the supply chain, continuity policy, and procedures, and are aware of their contributions to the effectiveness of the management system. The communication plan serves as a mechanism to transfer this awareness and ensure coordinated action during a disruption, thereby contributing to the overall resilience of the supply chain. Question 28. An internal auditor is reviewing the supply chain continuity plan of a global electronics manufacturer following a significant geopolitical event that disrupted the availability of a critical semiconductor component from its primary supplier in Southeast Asia. The manufacturer's business continuity team has activated its recovery procedure, which involves sourcing the component from a pre-qualified secondary supplier in Eastern Europe. During the audit, the auditor discovers that while the secondary supplier is listed in the plan and has undergone initial vetting, there is no documented evidence of recent capacity verification or confirmation of their adherence to the manufacturer's updated ethical sourcing policies, which were revised 6 months after the secondary supplier's initial qualification. What aspect of the recovery procedure's effectiveness is most likely compromised, according to the principles of ISO 22318-2015? Option A, the robustness of the communication protocols established with end customers regarding the potential impact on product delivery timelines. Option B, the speed at which the business continuity team identified and declared the disruption event. Option C, the adequacy of recent validation for the secondary supplier's operational capacity and compliance with current ethical sourcing mandates. Option D, the comprehensiveness of the risk assessment conducted prior to the geopolitical event impacting the primary supplier. The correct answer is C, the adequacy of recent validation for the secondary supplier's operational capacity and compliance with current ethical sourcing mandates. Explanation: the effectiveness of supply chain recovery procedures hinges on several critical factors, including the speed of detection and notification, the clarity and completeness of the predefined recovery plan, the availability and accessibility of alternate resources and suppliers, and the established communication channels with all stakeholders. ISO 22318-2015 emphasizes a structured approach to continuity management, which includes robust recovery strategies. A key element of these strategies is the ability to swiftly activate pre-identified alternative suppliers or internal resources when a disruption impacts a primary supply chain component. This requires not only having these alternatives documented, but also ensuring they have been vetted for capability, capacity, and compliance with relevant regulations, such as those pertaining to product safety or data privacy, depending on the industry. The integration of these pre-qualified alternatives into the operational framework allows for more seamless transition during a disruption, minimizing downtime and the overall impact on the organization's ability to deliver its products or services. Without such proactive preparation and integration, recovery efforts can be significantly delayed, leading to greater financial losses and reputational damage. The scenario described necessitates an auditor to assess the practical readiness and integration of these recovery mechanisms. Question 29. During an internal audit of a multinational corporation's supply chain continuity program, it was noted that while direct supplier contracts and customer service level agreements were thoroughly reviewed for continuity implications, the auditor identified a gap in the systematic consideration of regulatory compliance requirements impacting third-party logistics providers and the expectations of a significant investor group concerned about the long-term resilience of critical component sourcing. Which of the following best represents the auditor's finding regarding the organization's approach to identifying and addressing the needs and expectations of interested parties for supply chain continuity, as per ISO 22318-2015 principles? Option A. The organization's continuity plans are robust but do not explicitly document the process for incorporating feedback from non-contractual parties like regulatory agencies or financial institutions. Option B. The organization has demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of all interested parties' needs, including indirect suppliers and downstream consumers, which is fully compliant with ISO 22318-2015. Option C. The organization has focused solely on direct contractual relationships, overlooking the broader impact of regulatory frameworks and investor sentiment on supply chain stability. Option D. The organization has not adequately integrated the compliance obligations of regulatory bodies and the strategic resilience concerns of key financial stakeholders into its supply chain continuity planning. The correct answer is D. The organization has not adequately integrated the compliance obligations of regulatory bodies and the strategic resilience concerns of key financial stakeholders into its supply chain continuity planning. Explanation. ISO 22318-2015, specifically in its guidance on understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties for supply chain continuity, emphasizes a proactive and comprehensive approach. When auditing an organization's supply chain continuity management system, an internal auditor must assess how effectively the organization identifies and addresses the requirements of various stakeholders. This involves looking beyond immediate contractual obligations to consider broader influences and potential impacts. For instance, regulatory bodies, such as those overseeing critical infrastructure or data privacy, e.g., GDPR in Europe or specific national cybersecurity regulations, have explicit requirements that must be integrated into continuity plans. Similarly, end customers, even if not directly contracting with every tier of the supply chain, have expectations regarding product availability and service delivery, which can be significantly impacted by disruptions. Financial institutions providing credit or insurance also have vested interests in the stability and resilience of the supply chain. Therefore, an auditor would examine evidence of communication, consultation, and incorporation of these diverse expectations into the organization's risk assessments, business impact analyses, and continuity strategies. This ensures that the continuity program is robust and aligned with the overall operational and strategic objectives, considering the full spectrum of stakeholder influence. Question 30. During an internal audit of a global electronics manufacturer's supply chain continuity program, an auditor is reviewing the organization's approach to mitigating technological risks. The company relies heavily on an integrated cloud-based enterprise resource planning (ERP) system for inventory management, order processing, and supplier coordination. A recent regulatory directive, such as the proposed EU Cybersecurity Act, emphasizes the need for robust cybersecurity measures in critical infrastructure. Considering the principles of ISO 22318-2015, which of the following audit activities would be most effective in assessing the adequacy of the manufacturer's preparedness for technological disruptions affecting their ERP system? Option A. Interviewing key IT personnel to understand their personal experience with ERP system failures and asking for their subjective opinions on the system's reliability. Option B. examining the marketing materials and service level agreements, SLAs, provided by the ERP vendor to ensure they meet industry standards for uptime and data security. Option C. Reviewing the documented risk assessment methodology for technological dependencies, examining evidence of regular testing of the ERP system's disaster recovery and failover capabilities, and verifying the existence of a comprehensive cybersecurity incident response plan specifically addressing ERP vulnerabilities. Option D. Verifying that the company has purchased the latest version of the ERP software and has a valid support contract with the vendor, assuming this guarantees continuity. The correct answer is C. Reviewing the documented risk assessment methodology for technological dependencies, examining evidence of regular testing of the ERP system's disaster recovery and failover capabilities, and verifying the existence of a comprehensive cybersecurity incident response plan, specifically addressing ERP vulnerabilities. Explanation. The question pertains to the internal auditor's role in assessing technological risks within a supply chain continuity framework, specifically referencing ISO 22318-2015. The core concept being tested is the auditor's responsibility in verifying that the organization has established mechanisms to identify, assess, and respond to technological disruptions. ISO 22318-2015, while not a prescriptive standard for specific technologies, mandates a risk-based approach to supply chain continuity. This means an auditor must look for evidence that the organization proactively considers how advancements and failures in technology can impact its ability to deliver products or services. Such evidence would include documented processes for technology risk assessment, contingency plans for critical IT systems, and testing of these plans. For instance, an auditor might review the organization's procedures for evaluating the resilience of cloud-based logistics platforms, the cybersecurity measures protecting sensitive supply chain data, or the contingency plans for automated warehousing systems. The auditor's role is to confirm that these elements are integrated into the overall business continuity management system and are regularly reviewed and updated. The focus is on the effectiveness of the management system in addressing technological vulnerabilities, not on the specific technical details of the technologies themselves. Therefore, the most appropriate approach for an auditor is to examine the documented procedures and evidence of their implementation and testing.